I'd like today to pass comment on an aspect of specialist practice, namely that of reporting. I'll just give an impetus behind this commentary, run through the areas of concern, some of the repercussions of this, and a way to possibly address them. So over the course of 5 years, a research master's was undertaken at UCD, looking at lithics from Chalcolithic and Bronze Age domestic sites, a standard researcher program, identify and assemblage, analyze it, look at the results, and compare and contrast with current interpretations. However, the primary goals of this were undermined, mainly due to inaccessible terminology used by lithic specialists, and unsupported views espoused within lithic reports and more general texts. This led to two changes in the program of research. The first was a thorough review of international research on bipolar lithic reduction, and the second was spurred by a reading of this report by the National Association of Scholars in 2018. It looked at the replicability and reproducibility of results, namely relating to statistics within medical publications. The introductory chapter was readily, all of the criticisms and comments within the introductory chapter were readily applicable, certainly to Irish lithic commentary. So following this, a chapter reviewing lithic analyses was undertaken, and the experience from that review is informing comments today. From that, several areas of concern can be identified. So just as a caveat, the kind of critique here is informed primarily by lithic reports, that review of lithic reports. During the project, there was some cursory reading of other specialist reports. Some of the issues are apparent in those, but it cannot stand over the comments to the same degree of other areas as of other specialisms as with lithics. So we have three primary areas of concern: the methodology, a glossary, and bibliography. All three of these are interlinked to some degree, but they all have issues within themselves as well. For methodologies within lithic analysis reports, they are largely inadequate. Typically, there is mention of Excel as a catalogue, sometimes incorrectly as a database. There may be mention of a statistical analysis program, and there are usually one or two standard references, such as the Woodman et al. 2006 for lithic, Irish lithic typologies, or Inazan et al. For lithic reduction technologies. What is missing is details on equipment used. It is safe to assume that they use calipers and weighing scales. However, we are not actually told this to any degree. Kind of the main criticism of the lack of equipment here is that of magnification. It's impossible to know whether analysts are actually magnifying pieces to identify characteristics of reduction technologies, or to identify aspects of use-wear, which is sometimes mentioned within pieces in reports, which are simply given no information on magnification whatsoever. Similarly, with the nuances to lithic typologies and technologies, one or two standard references does not cover the range within these, and we simply are not directed to where researchers are getting establishing these categories. Again, this kind of feeds into a glossary, which is, I would say, non-existent, really, either at an individual or a universal basis, certainly for lithics, and I did not note any references directing me to glossaries for other areas either. There is one lithic analyst who, within the report, within the body of report, provides a glossary. However, this is insufficient, as it simply details kind of standard categories of classification, so flake, blade, core, and does not go into any information on reduction technologies or detailed typologies. These are specialist technical reports with specialist technical jargon, and they are not readily accessible. It's certainly not to people without any degree of that specialism, but even from my own experience, I could not understand many of the terms used within lithic reports after 5 years of research, which is a major issue. One example would be the use of expedient in terms of bipolar lithic reduction. It is frequently seen within lithic reports. If you look up expedient in a dictionary, it is defined as an action that is convenient, practical, with an essence of impropriety or immorality. I don't see how this applies to bipolar lithic reduction. It wasn't until 2 or 3 years into the project that I found in an American text an explanation of expedient being unretouched or informal lithics. There's no way to make the jump from one to the other. And even within this, we see a variation from another article by an Irish analyst. We see them commenting that the retouch on hollow scrapers can be achieved expediently, which seems to fall somewhere between the two definitions again. So without any glossary being provided by specialists, we simply have a variance in usage of terms or a lack of understanding. And finally, the bibliography. It's a bit strange to be commenting on bibliography, given that most specialists will come from a postgraduate research program where referencing and bibliographies are very much pushed. However, certainly within lithic reports, we see bibliographies with as few as 5 references. For other specialisms, for pottery, there are specialists who will give extensive references in support of their reports. However, there are also pottery reports with only a handful of references in support again. I would argue that the issues with bibliography are largely a product of the shortcomings of the methodology in the glossary. If you have a properly established and supported methodology, you should be looking at 5 or 6 references as a minimum. If you build a comprehensive glossary, you automatically populate a bibliography with references supporting it. Another issue here is that certainly within lithics, specialists do not support statements given within dating or within discussion. So they're just not providing any supporting references. You do not need to provide a reference, but neither are they providing supporting explanations. So we have no references, no explanations for statements given within specialist reports. Some compounding issues with the bibliography is self-referencing. Not an issue in of itself. However, when you couple self-referencing of 2 or 3 references with an insubstantial bibliography of 8 references, it shows a certain lack of awareness as to research going on outside of your own work. None of the international papers on bipolar material appeared in any lithic report that I went through. So just self-referencing can indicate a lack of awareness of other research programs being progressed. Another compounding issue within bibliographies would be difficult to access sources. So this could be theses sitting on university library shelves, or unpublished excavation reports within archives, or out of print publications as well, that happen to be on that analyst's own personal shelf. If you're supporting your arguments with these, it makes it very difficult for anybody else to actually access that supporting information. There's nothing very glamorous here. It's all very boring and mundane. Nobody really talks about bibliographies. However, these are fundamental aspects of scientific method and scientific reporting, and certainly within lithic analyses, they are not being done right. This has several repercussions for the archaeological practice. Firstly is the development of knowledge silos. Each analyst essentially becomes, they simply present their own version of the archaeological record. There is very little interaction between analysts seen, very little cross-referencing. And this can result in contradictions. We have one lithic analyst who states that lithic use ends by the end of the Middle Bronze Age or the start of the Late Bronze Age, whereas we have another lithic analyst who states that lithic use continues up into the medieval period. Two very contradictory statements, and two that cannot be both held to be true. Some of the contradictions go, there will be differences in interpretation. There will always be differences in interpretation, but some of what we're seeing goes far beyond that, and it just is a product of each analyst operating within their own sphere and not engaging with work going on around them. We end up having to take them at face value, essentially, and this leads to problems. Becomes basically our knowledge of the archaeological record simply becomes inaccessible. There's often a lack of publications by lithic analysts detailing either their dating schema, their technological understandings, or their development of typologies. There's also within inaccessibility, I would include a lack of contact details. Within specialist reports, there's never any contact detail given. Most analysts do not host a website, so it's impossible to go searching outside or out beyond that. Whatever about independent verification within the scientific method, this makes dependent verification very difficult as well, in that I cannot chase that analyst down to actually clarify what they are saying. This leads to, you essentially end up here, rather than simply interpreting the archaeological record, you end up interpreting the archaeologist's record of the archaeological record. And it also, this causes problems for, certainly as myself, starting out into a research program. It meant I essentially had to reinvent the wheel and establish, after 100, 150 years of lithic research, I had to go searching back for some of the most basic terms to try and find definitions and ways to identify them. I would say all this leads to a lack of trust on the part of commentators who are not specialists. Writing in 2018 about beaker material, Carlin does not use, or he dismisses the use of lithics as a valid way to date beaker activity. At the time of this publication and at the time of the PhD that it was based on in 2011, you do have lithic analysts, at least one lithic analyst who's espousing sub-period dating, so to the Middle Neolithic, the Late Neolithic, the Chalcolithic, Early and Middle Bronze Age, based on typology, based on technology. So here we have a non-specialist dismissing the work and opinions of a specialist. So I would also say it contributes to discouraging. In 2019 at the Cork IAI conference, we heard from a lecturer about the difficulty of coaxing in recent graduates into uptaking of specialisms. If your first contact or if your first interaction with a specialism is an illegible and nonsensical report full of technical jargon, you're not going to be encouraged to take it up. It is difficult to see ways to contribute to research, to our understanding of the archaeological record, and it also presents a greater challenge than needs be for anybody seeking entry into that specialism. And ultimately, it wastes funding. If archaeology is not a well-funded sector, the research studies have a small pot to draw from, and within commercial archaeology, profit margins can be tight. If we are spending money on a report that can only be understood by the person who wrote it, it contributes nothing or very little to our greater understanding of Irish archaeology. So how do we address the issues present within reports and some of the repercussions? I would argue there are two avenues. one, specialists themselves, and then also by the practice at large. So just to, first on the specialists, review your own reports, either by yourself or hand them off to somebody who can read them for you. Can they identify what steps you undertook to complete the analysis? Can they understand any terms that you use within it without them having to ask you? If these are not being met, then you need to go back and address those shortcomings. On a practical level, or kind of a more direct way to this would be the production of a comprehensive glossary. I use the term accompaniment here simply because it's what I called my own. This goes beyond simply term and definition. It gives dating schema and the references to support that. It goes into some more in-depth explanations such as that for condition of lithics, and it touches on some theoretical aspects such as the discussion of residuality or infiltration of objects within the record. So it goes far beyond what you see as the standard glossary in the back of most textbooks. I would argue that all specialists should undertake this. There is an onus on you to make work that you are paid for, especially where public monies are concerned, to make your work understandable to everybody and accessible to everybody. Following this, we can move to a universal guide. I argue for this sequence just because within lithics, the range and variation between between analysts, it would be pointless to have them all sit down at a table. There's just simply too great a difference in some of the aspects that are being talked about. It is better to have them all establish it individually and then draw down the commonalities and address any contradictions or omissions then. For other areas such as osteo or pottery, it might be possible to skip straight to a universal guide. So for the practice at large, and kind of referring to everybody outside of specialisms here, so regulatory bodies, NMS, NMI, representational bodies, IAI, training bodies, so universities, and clients as well. Clients, the people who are paying for reports at the end of the day, have a very important role in upholding standards of practice. So I would suggest that the IAI hosts a seminar on specialist reporting. This could be a one-day event. Have a panel drawn down from the board of the IAI, from NMS, from NMI. Have them host a discussion between clients. They can state what issues they are currently experiencing with specialist reporting, what they would like to see within specialist reporting, and then have specialists on the other side saying, well, this is feasible or this is not feasible. You can't ask the sun, moon, and stars of specialists, but we can certainly ask for claims to be supported, and there are some things we can certainly ask for. Following the seminar, we could go to NMS for a standard on specialist reporting. There's a guideline rather. There is a guideline for the production or for the write-up of excavation reports. It is certainly within reach to establish a guideline for writing specialist reports. This would give clients something to go back to specialists with and go, you have to meet these standards, otherwise we cannot submit our reports. And then in tandem with these two, we can go to universities. I would say there is an issue with training here.
2 minutes, Cian.
Yep, most research projects at universities will have a methodology, will have an extensive bibliography. If these are not appearing within specialist reports subsequently, there's clearly an issue of transference. It would be possible to train or to certainly indicate the necessities and the basis for scientific reporting within a half-day workshop. If you wanted something more comprehensive, have a series of half-day workshops. And once all of these are done, you go back and you do them again, revisit, redo again and again. For specialists, our knowledge is in a continuing state of movement, with dating schema are refined, or knowledge is being pushed on by new research programs. For anything regarding guidelines or training, what looks good on paper may not work in reality. We need to go back and revisit those. So in conclusion, there are concerning issues of practice within specialism, namely relating to standards of scientific reporting. This is due to a lack of specialist standards being written down and being enforced. There's also a lack of relevant training being supplied, which feeds into this. This leads to incoherency amongst analysts and, in extreme cases, dismissal of the analyst the specialist's opinion. However, a concerted response from across the archaeological sector will allow us to set out standards of practice and establish a relevant training program, which ultimately will provide for a higher quality of practice and a better understanding of the Irish archaeological record. And then just to acknowledge Professor Graham Warren, supervisor for the 5 years, Heather Jimson for facilitating the research, everybody who took the time to respond to emails or shared comments and information or reports over the course of that time, and for the board of the IAI for having me here today. Thank you.